All right, I'm going to let everyone in. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. We are going to get started in just 1 minute. So settle in. Go grab your last cup of coffee or tea. We'll get started in about 1 minute. Hold on.
Buenos días.
Hola, buenos días. ¿Qué tal?
Yes.
Welcome to everybody. If you're just joining us, you are all very welcome. We're going to get started in about 30 seconds. We're just letting people kind of filter in. All right, welcome everybody. We're very excited for today's webinar. It's operationalizing locally led development. Where do we go next? And this webinar, what's exciting about it today is it really is the culmination of many, many months of discussion and work and findings, and thinking about what have we heard, what have we learned, and what does this mean for us? So my name is Kim Kaczynskis. I'm the Director of Community Strategies here at Humentum. I'm here just to welcome you, make sure things are running well, and then I will hand it off to my colleagues. But it wouldn't be a webinar if we didn't first start and to say thank you to our industry partners who really do make all of this programming available. So if you're just joining us, what you can expect for the next hour and a half is we're going to start really just by setting the scene and having an informal discussion, thinking about what we've done in the last year of programming and really what the findings are, what we started to see, the trends, et cetera, that we have started to see. We are then going to turn it over to you as we lay out what some of the lessons learned are and get your feedback and your insights into whether that's relevant to you, whether whether it resonates with you, et cetera. And then we'll go into breakout groups and really start to dive into what does this mean and what are some recommendations that you all can come up with based on the findings that we have that we've put together. So and then we'll come back and we'll share it out and we'll see where we have landed. So that's kind of how we are planning the next hour and a half. For those of you just joining, you are very, very welcome. A few housekeeping items for you. We do have closed captioning on. If you would like to make use of that, at the bottom of your screen, you should see a button that says click show captions, and you're encouraged and welcome to do that. We are also recording today's session. In about 45 minutes, as I mentioned, we are going to ask you to get into groups to have small group discussions. You are going to have a choice to talk about one of 4 different topics. Now, the 4 different topics are what you are going to see on your screen in just a minute. And we're going to ask you to help us prepare those breakouts by changing your name. That's going to help us know which group you want to go in, which topic you want to talk about. So the way that I'm going to ask you to do this is the instructions are right there on the screen. I'm going to ask you to hover your mouse over your name where you see those 3 dots and click the rename button. And then if you would like to talk about institutional architecture, by that we mean things like governance, leadership, the structure of your organization, write IA right next to your name. If you want to talk about people and culture, please write PC right next to your name. If you would like to talk about funding and financing, FF. And if you would like to talk about risk and compliance, please put RC. Now you'll see the example at the bottom. Please put the 2 letters at the start of your name. That's going to help my colleague Helen put you into the right breakout group. I'm going to give you those instructions in a little bit, but please, if you do it now, it would really help. So I'm seeing a few people starting to do that. Thank you. I'm going to say it one more time. Click on the 3 buttons next to your name, click rename, and then based on what you see here on the screen, whichever topic you would like to talk about, please put those 2 letters in the front of your name. And I'm hearing from a few people that if you had to leave at the top of the hour, that's quite all right. We'll get you into breakouts depending on time. And if you need to drop off, that's okay too. All right, so that is all of my kind of logistics housekeeping pieces. I am going to stop sharing, and we're going to get started today with really just listening to a discussion about those high-level findings that we've been hearing throughout the year. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Christine, to kick us off.
Great. Thank you so much, Kim. I am Christine So. I'm Humentum's CEO, and it's my pleasure to join all of you here today. I just want to let you know that I have two screens going right now. I have some notes in front of me, and I also have a screen so that I can see the faces of the people who are presenting, and most importantly, so that I can see the meeting chat. So first thing I want to do is to invite all of you, as we are talking and throughout the course of this webinar, to please use the chat for any comments or questions you'd like to share with us. We're not going to wait and have it as a static Q&A moment. Rather, we are going to be pulling comments and questions from the chat as we go. So please feel free to use that. Or if you'd just like to introduce yourself, we'd love to hear from all of you about who you are, where you may be based, what work you do. So the chat is really there for that. So just so everyone knows, that's why I may be looking to the side and also in front of me because of these two screens. So I'm really happy to be your moderator today. We have had a fantastic year of discussion around locally led development, also referred to as locally driven development, localization. There are a lot of different words for it. We at Humentum use locally led development or locally owned or driven development as our term, as our preferred term. I am joined today by Cynthia Smith, who's our Director of Government Affairs, Jenna Thoretz, who works very closely with Cynthia as a manager on our Government Affairs team, Eni Chipimbere, who is our Director of Locally Led Development, and Kim Kusinskis, who you've already met, who's our Director of Community Strategy. I'm excited to have them with us because they're really going to provide us with an overview, the key takeaways and reactions to the work that we've been doing with all of you over the past year. As a reminder, or maybe as information for you, we've convened more than 2,000 policymakers and practitioners, donors, members of international NGOs, INGOs, and national NGOs over the past year. People from more than 100 countries have joined us to debate what it will take to realize the locally led development policies that are being put out by donors. And we've had a real target and specific focus on USAID. And we know that so many of you are either receiving USAID funding or partnering with USAID in some way. And so that has been really the focus of a lot of these discussions. We've been looking at what it will take to realize USAID's specific targets, but also more broadly, a more inclusive and locally led sector. And we've had panelists on these discussions from 18 different organizations. And I want to thank everybody who has been one of our panelists. And I also want to thank all of you, again, going back to this idea of the chat. We've gotten great discussion and contributions through the chat contributions that we've had over the past year. And that's really a way for all of you to participate and have your voice heard. So I want to thank everybody for that. Humentum realizes the value of what we've put together. And so we've pulled that into a summary findings document. This has been released, so you may have already seen it. We'll also be dropping the link into the chat. And I see that Kim has just done this. So if you want access to the summary right now, please go ahead and access it through the link in the chat. We are going to be releasing a full report in early 2023, so please stay tuned for that. The summary consolidates the lessons we've learned over the course of the year, and today's event is a chance for you to reflect on these lessons and co-create policy recommendations with us. We believe the co-creation aspect and component of policy development is really important because that leads to more appropriate, more applicable, more effective policy decisions when we hear lots of voices coming in and weighing in on what a particular policy should look like. So today is an opportunity for you to have your voice heard in terms of policy recommendations. This is our final event in this webinar series on operationalizing locally led development. And we are really excited because we've made this an interactive session. We'll have the chance to hear from you through a menti poll. If you haven't done menti before, you'll learn it today. And if you've been in other Humentum events, you will probably have already done a menti. But it's a great way to see what you're thinking in the moment. So that menti poll will be a moment where we are presenting the main takeaways from our discussions over the past year that you will also find in that summary document. And to get your thoughts on those. We'll also have a period where we break into breakout rooms, as Kim already suggested, and asked you to put your name and your preferred breakout room on your Zoom icon. Those breakout rooms will give us the opportunity for small group discussions to capture those policy recommendations that you want to make, and then feed them back to the group. So both of those, the menti poll and the breakout rooms, will be an opportunity to hear your voice. And why is it important, do we believe, to hear from you? It's because you all are the people tasked with actually implementing the policies, doing the work. You're really thinking about this. You know what your colleagues and stakeholders are saying and how they're reacting to how locally led development policy is being rolled out. And so we want to hear from you today. So with that, I'm going to shift into a quick panel discussion. And I'm going to be calling on my colleagues who have really been running the work over the past year. And we'll be hearing from them about the series itself and the takeaways that we've been pulling together from everything that you have contributed. So Cynthia and Jenna, welcome. Thank you for being here with us today. I don't know if I should be welcoming you because this is really your thing to do. But I'm so glad to be here to discuss it with you. Can you tell us a bit more about the focus of the report that will be coming out and the series overall? Cynthia, why don't you start us off?
Sure. Thanks so much, Christine, and thanks everyone for joining us today. We're just so pleased to have you back with us once again at the end of this year-long series. So why did we develop this series in the first place, and kind of why are we here today? In late 2021, when Administrator Ambassador Samantha Power from USAID announced USAID's new vision for locally led development and more inclusive development, we read kind of her speech. We talked about her speech. We heard from some of our members about her speech, and we were listening and kind of taking the pulse of the conversations that were being had in the sector around what her vision and her targets were aiming to be. And we asked ourselves, so what is it going to take to operationalize this, to really make it happen this time around, right? To make localization or locally led development stick. It's definitely been something that's been attempted in different iterations by USAID, certainly, but also across the sector over the last several decades, actually. So what's different this time? Why and how can it be different this time? And what role can, yes, Humentum play, but what role can international development and humanitarian assistance organizations play in really making the shift of power happen that's necessary for locally led development to be realized? So we wanted to bring together thinkers from across the globe, NGO representatives, those who are working at the local level and who know best kind of what their needs are and how to meet them. We wanted to bring together the donor community. So we heard from USAID and their policy folks directly. We wanted to bring together folks from think tanks and from INGOs and the traditional implementing partners to USAID to kind of really dissect these issues and say, what do we need to do differently? And for us at Humentum, what that really kind of pivots around is how do you operationalize how do you do the how of development? It's not the what, it's not the why, but how do we realize development? And that's through implementation of programs. It's through policies and practices. It's through compliance and risk sharing. It's through really those kind of back office, if you will, activities and undertakings that will shape and shift the way programs are implemented, and also whether they're successful and enjoy sustainability over the long term. So we wanted to look at 4 core areas in particular, and we designed the series based on and around these 4 core areas. And they are what we call our levers of change and our theory of change at Humentum. They're the levers of change that are fundamental to shifting power in the sector to make it more equitable, resilient, and accountable. And those include the compliance and risk, institutional architecture, people and culture, and funding and financing. It's a lot of the how of why we do and what we do. And so when we put together the panels and we looked at what the discussions kind of centered around, we teased out some common threads across these 4 areas. And those are what you see in the findings of the summary document. What did we hear? What resonated the most across all of the panels over the course of the year, and divisible by these 4 core areas. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jenna, to kind of elucidate a little bit further what we saw and what we heard.
Sure. Thank you, Cynthia, and thank you, Christine. As Cynthia said, I'm delighted to be here with all of you today. Definitely take a look at the link that Kim has just put in the chat. This is kind of where we have outlined all of our findings, as Cynthia said. And we really see at Humentum that our theory of change is woven into everything that we do here. And it represents kind of across the spectrum, the actions that different organizations need to take to operationalize locally led development. And we really look at things as being an everyday kind of operations perspective. What are the challenges that folks are facing? And what are the things that need to change? So we'll go through all of the lessons more specifically in a few moments, but generally for institutional architecture, we're talking about kind of how our organizations are set up and how the work is being allocated and how decisions are being made. So looking at where decisions are being made globally, are they being made in high income countries, or are they being made in low and middle income countries by the individuals who are benefiting or doing the development work themselves. Next, looking at people and culture, this is all about kind of who has a seat at the table, how folks are being compensated, how different people's perspectives are being valued. Personally, we really looked at this from a capacity strengthening perspective and had some really fantastic discussions over the year about the fact that not all capacity strengthening is created equal. You know, there's top-down kind of donor managed and mandated capacity strengthening, and then there's really locally owned and driven capacity strengthening. So we'll get into all of that a little bit later. Next, funding and financing. How do we finance the work that we're doing? We talked a lot about indirect cost recovery, about flexible funding, about making sure that we're funding projects over the long term and recognizing that development can't always be neatly condensed into a 1 or 2 year program cycle. And then finally, risk and compliance, which we have definitely heard from our members is a key topic of interest as the sector kind of grapples with these issues. So as we're getting involved more with funding local organizations directly, what kind of risks does that place on local organizations? How are they being expected to absorb those risks? You know, to what extent are donors and traditional implementing partners sharing those risks? And kind of secondarily to that, how does compliance factor into this? You know, as we all know, donors often have their own very onerous set of compliance burdens that they pass on to their implementing partners. And how does that really hinder new partners and new local partners from being involved and being included in the development process? So that's just a quick overview of kind of what we talked about over the course of the year. But I'll hand it back to you, Christine.
Great. Thanks, Cynthia, and thank you, Jenna, for that great overview. I want to shift to our colleague, Eni. Eni Chippenberry is our Director of Locally Led Development at Humentum. And I wanted to have her really give us an idea of how we're starting to work with national NGO partners. How are we bringing both sides of this conversation together? So it's thinking about, you know, as Cynthia and Jenna have been talking about, donor policies, but also really how is this affecting national NGOs and what are we hearing from national NGOs around these 4 foundation areas and the really important priorities that are coming out from those discussions. Eni, over to you.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Cynthia and Jenna, for the wonderful work you've done to bring us to this point, and everybody who contributed to that. My role today is, as Christine pointed out, to elaborate just a little bit more on how, as Humentum, we are working with NGO partners. So where we start from in that commitment is, as our theory of change says, we do believe that equitable and locally led development will only really truly happen should it be driven by local actors. And who are those local actors? There are a plethora of local actors defined differently. For us, we have the capacity and we see an inflection point and a point where we really can support in this movement, working with national NGOs and starting to develop that relationship quite intentionally on the continent in Africa, which is something we haven't done before, but it's our commitment that really shows that we don't want to just talk about this theoretically. It's been talked about a long time, localization, local development, shifting power, and we are moving to take that practical action and subordinate ourselves to say, we want to be there to start talking quite practically with local actors to find out with national NGOs who's aligned to this thinking, right? Because when you look on the African continent, if you just do a Google search, for example, you will find not many of the truly local indigenous, either actors, directors, or organizations actually talking about this or actually writing about this, right? Yet we say, for local development to truly happen, it should be driven by local actors. So the starting point is just to find out, right, who is aligned to the thinking, who's talking and writing about it or interested in doing that, who is interested in working or already doing something that's related to making this shift in the sector a reality, and who wants to work with others in doing that. And if you look at the summary report that was produced by Cynthia and Jenna and the webinar series, at a broad global level, that's what we're starting to do. And now going a bit deeper at a continental level, at a granular level, we are now starting to say, okay, so quite practically, who is interested and who should we work with? And then on the how, as I said, we are very availing ourselves as a facilitator, as a convener at this point, whilst we try and see, the national NGOs who would like to take up leadership of this agenda and who would like to come together in a cohort of national NGOs to push this agenda. So starting off in this year up to from now until end of next year, 2023, we're just focusing on 5 countries: Zimbabwe, South Africa, Kenya, Uganda, and Nigeria, right? And this is purely logistically that we can start there. But that doesn't mean anyone else who is interested in quite actively being part of this national NGOs cohort on the continent to talk about the issues, to write about the issues, to analyze them, to identify the advocacy and policy areas where they think they need to push, to identify, broader capacity strengthening areas that say, okay, if we focus quite practically, for example, on institutional strengthening, we should be able then to drive this agenda. And then in terms of CEO executives, quite specifically, we know in organizations, the leadership and governance is quite important in moving things, in driving things. So we're also looking at convening a national NGO CEOs cohort so that as they lead this agenda as peers, they can support each other. And I can actually tell you quite practically, last week, we were really, really honored to be given the space and opportunity by the National Association of NGOs in Zimbabwe, as they did the annual retreat of directors, a strong 130 directors, to talk about this, but also to actually facilitate the 2-day retreat. And what they were talking about, which then resonates in with the 4 foundation areas that we've been talking about, is really, we want to lead this agenda, but quite institutionally, our structures, our constitution, our boards are incapacitated. We have the commitment, but really the capacity to take up leadership on some of these issues is not possible. Because if you connect it now to funding and financial systems, it's connected to the funding they get and then the agenda they are told to set. So how do you then take up leadership and drive an agenda when the agenda is really determined by the person who's bringing the funding? And on top of that, when it comes to, human resource, people and culture, right? So they say, as national NGOs, now I want to bring in the other development partner, which is international NGOs, that they're almost like a grooming ground, right? They do work and support and struggle to build the capacity of their staff as much as they can. But the international NGOs, who are also development partners, come in and take their staff. So there are a lot of issues that incapacitate them from taking up leadership in this agenda. And for those who were there in this NANGO directors retreat, who work in the humanitarian sector, they were then talking about issues of risk and accountability, which is the 4th foundational area of our theory of change. And they were saying that the level of mistrust, right, and the level of fear of funding partners in terms of it's a risk to give a local actor leadership and direct funding is really the reason why the grand bargain localization agenda is struggling. So unless the risk approaches are contextualized and there is a time to build trust, then it's not going to become a reality. So the 4 foundational areas quite practically resonate with national NGOs. But for them, what they also mentioned was in the short term, they really appreciate that some of these changes or big shifts that are happening in the sector globally, they don't get to really hear about them or learn about them. So the awareness raising is very important, which this webinar series that happened as it continues also plays an instrumental role. And funding is really continues to be a struggle for them and is quite critical, as well as environmental pressures. But they said quite practically in the long term, where they see the strategic change happening is in their institutional or operating models being strengthened, because if they are capacitated and strong, they can push back, right? So that's what I just wanted to share from the work we are doing with national NGOs.
Annie, thank you so much. There were so many points that you made. I can't even try to summarize them, but what I will say is I'm really looking forward to the work that we're going to be doing in 2023 and beyond, which will give us a great opportunity to get into all of these themes and to build partnership really around how we are operationalizing locally led and locally driven development. I'm keeping an eye on the clock because I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for our interactive work together. I'm just going to ask Cynthia to round out this section of the webinar. Can Cynthia, shifting back to this idea of donor policy and how donors are trying to enact a localization agenda or a locally led development agenda, what should our participants in this webinar today be thinking about as they discuss and think about their policy recommendations that they want to share with us? What would you like to be hearing back from them?
Sure. Thanks, Christine. Great question. Yeah, we really want to have an opportunity for you all to have a space to say, okay, given these lessons in these core areas, these fundamental areas that are crucial to operationalizing locally led development, what are the key policy interventions that, yes, USAID is leading on, but it has yet to kind of fully implement and execute? For example, we're still waiting for the ANA strategy to come out, the refreshed strategy. So what policy changes can donors like USAID and others make in the immediate and midterm that will really shift move the ball down the field, if you will, and kind of make this this effort a reality, and more of a reality more quickly and more readily. So we want you to just kind of look at it and go, what can practically the donors do in the area of risk sharing and risk, how do you avoid risk transfer, for example? How do you implement and institute an environment or create an enabling environment, for example, for risk sharing among INGOs, donors, and NGOs? What needs to be done at the donor level? What needs to be done at the INGO level, for example, to shift that power, to shift that risk and share it more equitably? So that's just one example. And, we really look forward to hearing what you all come up with and look forward to incorporating it into the final report.
Great. Thanks, Cynthia. So I'm going to shift us over to Kim, who is going to get us started on the more interactive part of this webinar with the menti. Kim, over to you.
Thank you very much. Okay, let me just remove the spotlight so you're not right there, Christine. Okay, so what we're going to do now is start to talk about what some of those findings actually were, and then get a little bit of your feedback from there. So what I'm going to ask you to do is go to this link here. It's a menti poll, so you can follow along with the presentation and also add your voice. You should, when you go to this link, you should see the screen or some of the questions that you see here on the screen. If you would like to, you can also open up a tab on your browser or take out your mobile phone and go to menti.com and put the code in 2556413. That's 2556413, and you should be able to follow along with us here. And really, these are the top lessons that came out from each of these in those 4 buckets that was just discussed. So Christine, I don't know if you want to talk through what these pieces are. I already see some people putting in their thoughts.
Great, so thank you. Yeah, so we're asking people to respond to these, but let me read them out loud for everyone. When we're thinking about institutional architecture, how do these resonate with you? And we're asking you to say if you strongly agree or strongly disagree. The takeaways that we found from the webinar series, the first one is that centralized decision-making and authority in high-income countries limit the flexibility, agility, and efficacy of programming. Do you agree with this statement or disagree with this statement? The second statement, procurement designed in and by high-income countries for low and middle-income countries cannot fully address the needs and priorities of affected communities. So this is really getting to the idea of where is the design taking place? Where are the procurements being put together? Is it close to the communities where the work will be done, or is it taking place somewhere else? And the third statement is national NGOs are expected to mirror the operating models of high-income countries. And I would say INGOs is one of the things that we're thinking of here, limiting their accountability, sustainability, and efficacy. So this is about the idea of autonomy. Are national NGOs free to really design their own institutional architecture and business models, or are they expected to really build to a model that is donor dictated or donor driven? Okay, why don't we move on to the next one? And actually, Kim, can I ask you, as we're going to put, or somebody to put what we're seeing in terms of scores into the chat so that we can continue to see the responses, even if we've moved on to the next slide. So people and culture, how do these resonate with you? The sector must confront its false assumptions about national NGOs before it shifts policies in favor of locally led development. I think, we heard some reference to this already today around, who is doing the work. Literally, can people working in their own country and leading work in their own country be trusted with financial stewardship, which is one of those issues that we've talked about in a number of webinars over the course of the past year. The second is national NGOs should determine their own priorities for capacity strengthening, and organizational resilience and funding should follow in turn. So again, who is deciding the priorities, and when does what does the funding respond to? Does it respond to priorities that are decided at the local and national level, or does it respond to priorities that are set somewhere else? And the third is local knowledge should be valued in equal measure to globally sourced knowledge. So really thinking about what we can hear from those who are closest to the work and to that is being done, to the issues that are being raised and addressed, and what is the balance between that and what is being done at the global level. Okay, let's move on to the next one. So lessons about funding and financing. First is that the current financing system leads to both funder and recipient fatigue, hindering innovative and effective programming. Kim, I'm wondering if this is working because I only see ones.
I think it should just take a few minutes for people.
Okay, we may just have a little bit of a lag in the menti.
There we go. They're coming in.
Great. The second is to deliver long-term sustainable programming. National NGOs require trust-based flexible financing. So this is getting at the idea that there is trust-based compliance rather than probably the more traditional approach of flowing down clauses and regulations and rules. It's also about flexible financing. So it is, how is the funding being structured? Is there unrestricted or indirect funding being provided to national NGOs? Are national NGOs being funded to execute their scope of work that they themselves have set as their priority, or do they have to necessarily respond to the funding as laid out and dictated by the donor agency? And the third is innovative financing has tremendous potential for the sector, but it is a neutral tool that must be locally owned from inception. I will just note that innovative financing is a broad term, and there are lots of things that fall under the notion of innovative financing. But I think the idea here is that we are thinking about how to work outside of the traditional box, as it were, and try new mechanisms for funding within the sector. And where does ownership and authority around what those funding mechanisms are reside. And then the next one, which is the fourth area. So around risk and compliance, and I will just say that for Humentum, we really, partnership cuts across all of this, but we really look at the idea of strategic partnership as falling under this risk and compliance rubric. The first is that funders must recalculate risk in the acknowledgement that when programming is not locally led, it risks being unsustainable and ineffective. So it's about how risk is actually determined and where the risk resides. The second is to mitigate risk effectively, the sector must invest in mutual accountability mechanisms. So the idea that we should move towards risk sharing rather than risk assignment. And that if there are multiple actors working within one project or initiative, there needs to be mutual accountability. And the third is that onerous compliance regimes associated with risk transfer preclude locally led development. So I'm just going to say that I bet a bunch of people on this webinar today have a lot of compliance regulations and requirements that you have to manage on a regular basis. And I encourage you to think about maybe how many audits you have to respond to a year. And that is really what we're thinking about here, the compliance regimen, but also the capacity and to meet all of those compliance requirements and the burden that those compliance requirements place on all of us. So thank you, Kim. I think across the board, we've seen high resonance in all of these findings. And again, just a reminder, these are ones that are coming out from what we've heard during the last year in all of these consultations. So now I want you to shift your thinking to a kind of broader overall picture. And in terms of true locally driven development or locally led development, according to all of the different definitions that we're using, so we may not all have exactly the same definition. How would you describe the sector as it exists today? Is the sector, really 100% getting locally led development? Are we failing? Are we somewhere on the way? This is a word cloud, so you can put in whatever word or words you would like to use here, and we will see them show up on the screen. And just a reminder for everybody, the size of the words indicates how many people are putting those particular words in. So right now we're seeing trying and slow as words that are, floating to the top of what we're hearing. I think we are hearing a lot, or we are in these responses, we're seeing a lot of words that can be grouped together. And I think it'll
Christine, what's jumping out to me is, I'm seeing positive words, but I'm also seeing blah, blah and lip service.
Yeah, a lot of cynicism in here, and that's okay. And I think what'll be interesting is we can take this word cloud and group these together in an informal grouping and provide that back to folks. So this is something that you may see again, and I think really reflects, as we are hoping to have today, the perspectives of the people who are in this webinar. So thank you for that.
And I like how in the center it's slow, which is, I think, indication there's a level of frustration no matter which hat you're wearing, no matter which of the stakeholders you're representing. There's a level of frustration about the slowness.
Yeah.
Will I go to the last one?
Yes. So let's move on to the next, which is the last one. So this one, I'm asking you to put your future hat on. In terms of locally led development, locally driven development, how would you describe the sector you'd like to see in 5 years? Not where we are today, but where we want to be in 5 years. And yeah, and I'm just going to say, it's not your I want to be clear, it's not your aspiration for the sector, it's where do you think we will be in 5 years? Yes, and I think, are we getting there? Okay, so I think we're seeing decentralized, and I think that again is something we're already seeing being put into action, but at different speeds by different partners. Again, going back to this idea of some cynicism in here, and that's okay, is the same. No change. We also have evolving, but we did see slow come up at the beginning, and I think that we continue to hear that there may be evolution, but it is not going at the pace that we would like. I think we've got some great aspiration in here, and I will say I hope that we can get there. Diverse funding mechanisms, equitable and just, more trust-based, locally led, more trust, meaningful, more collaborative, getting there. So I'm going to stop here. And I want to thank everybody for your contributions on this Menti poll. I think that was really interesting. I know it was really interesting for me. And we're going to move into now the next part of the webinar, which is a chance for you all to break into your small breakout groups and to have an opportunity to talk with each other about the policy recommendations that you think should be prioritized in this locally led, locally driven policy agenda with our donors. So Kim, why don't I go to you again for the instructions on this? And just for everybody's timing, when we break into groups, we will have between 20 and 25 minutes. So wherever you are, we will be coming back together at 20 minutes past the hour, unless you're somewhere that it's a 30-minute difference, in which case it'll be 50 minutes past the hour. So Kim, give us the instructions, please.
All right, and this is where you need to put on your, this is where we get a little bit fancy with our virtual webinars, but it's going to be okay. Many of you have already done this instructions for those of you who joined us at the very start, so thank you for that. You now have the chance to select which topic you want to talk about. And we're going to ask you, I just dropped the instructions here in the chat, to change your name with the 2 letters of the topic you want to talk about first. And then my colleague Helen is going to put you into the breakout groups. So if you would like to talk about institutional architecture, governance, leadership, org structure, put IA in front of your name. People and culture, PC. Funding and financing, FF, and risk and compliance, RC. If that doesn't work and you panic, just put it in the chat and Helen will get you where you need to go. It's okay. We're very low risk informal here. What we're doing, yes, Christine.
Kim, I just have to break in here because I realize I got the timing wrong on this. Apologies. When you break into your groups, you're going to have 15 minutes for discussion. That's going to take you to just past the top of the hour. I looked at the wrong part of the schedule.
Thank you. So if you have a meeting at the top of the hour, you might just be able to squeeze in a great conversation and then jump off. Because what we're going to do is we're going to get you into a group and we're going to ask you, throw the question here in the groups, we're going to ask you to discuss what policy and practice changes would you recommend to those who hold power? And it could be NGOs who hold power, it could be funders who hold power, it could be someone that we haven't even thought of. So if you're in the funding and financing group, what do you think? What suggestions would you be making? We are going to be using Google Slides in order to have these conversations. So when you get into your groups, at the top of your group, it'll say the name of your group. You might be institutional architecture, IA group 1. You're going to go to the link I'm going to give you in a minute, have the discussion, and take your notes in the slide that's been assigned to you. And then what we're going to do when we come back is we're going to ask one person from each group to kind of pick the top 1 or 2 ideas and share it with us in the chat so we can kind of unpack what everyone else has been learning about. So what that means is you're going to choose which group you would like to talk about, one of the 4 buckets that we keep mentioning, and change your name to let us know how to do that. When you get into your group, you're going to go into this Google Doc that I'll share right now. And you're going to have the discussion. Have the discussion, and as you're talking, kind of be writing down some of the ideas that you're coming up so we don't lose them. So we're capturing the really rich discussion that you're having. And then when we come back, assign one person to kind of curate what's most important, what resonated the most with the group, and put it in the chat for you. Now, I say this all the time, don't panic about the technology. If in doubt, just talk, just have the conversation. Some can be taking notes in a Word document and sharing it with us later. That's quite all right. But this is the plan so that we can see each other, see what everyone is already doing. So let's say you're in funding group 3, you'll come down here and you'll find funding group 3. Again, when in doubt, just take notes, have a discussion. You can always come back to the main room and ask us for instructions or to clarify what we need to do. So all of this is to say I am stalling so my colleague Helen can put you all into the right groups. Helen, how are we doing?
Sending them out in 1 minute.
Okay, so in a couple of seconds, you will be put into your breakout groups. Let me pause here and see if there are any questions. You can put the question in the chat or just go ahead and unmute and ask. There are some familiar names here, so you're familiar with Humentum pushing the virtual facilitation to the edge here. Okay. So let's say it one more time. You're going to pick your group, get into your groups. At the top of your grouping, you should see which number you're in. Find your space in the Google Slides, have the conversation for about 15 minutes, and then we'll come back and see what came up. Helen, whenever you're ready, you can send them out to their groups.
Okay, sending them now.
Welcome back, everybody. I hope that wasn't too much of a disruption to pull you all back. I hope some of you were in the midst of discussions. I see, I was kind of looking at the Google Slides as you were all in your breakout groups, and I saw some great energy and some great conversation points that were put in there. And we're really curious to see what you discussed. What kind of policy and practice, really practical changes and recommendations did you discuss and did you come up with? So what we're going to do is, if hopefully you ask one person in your group to kind of curate your top ideas. If you didn't, that's quite all right. If you were in that first group talking about institutional architecture, if one person from each group could just put the top 1 or 2, maybe 3 ideas into the chat right now, let's just see what everyone came up with. And if you are already in the Google Doc, you are also very welcome to just kind of scroll up and down and see what your colleagues put in there. In case you lost that link, here's the link to the Google Doc. But if you were in the institutional architecture group, please feel free right now to put in the chat, what were some of your top takeaways, top ideas that you came up with? Give everyone a few minutes to do that. And while I do, what I think I might do, because we only had a few institutional architecture groups, I think we can actually see it in the Google document itself. So feel free, if your group did not have a chance to write it in the Google Doc, please feel free to put it in the chat. But I'm looking at Cynthia and Christine and Jenna and Annie. These are some of the results that we're seeing, that changes should take place in the home offices of where the policies will take place. And then this group here, which was talking about, again, having policies in place around things like overhead, the financial structure, how to do certain programming, particularly with subs, a policy around decolonization. All of these things, what are your kind of thoughts, reactions, especially as far as the different conversations we've had throughout the series this year, and the different conversations that we've been having with all the different stakeholders involved?
Sure. I will just say, Kim, this really resonates, I think, with what we've heard in other spaces and in this space over the course of the last year, and based on our own kind of research on indirect cost recovery and full cost recovery of organizations, particularly national NGOs, and how donors kind of uniformly fail to cover the full cost of programming across the sector, and that's particularly damaging for local organizations that may not have kind of a safety net of unrestricted funding or other resources that they can bring to bear to bridge the gap that's created. So all of this discussion here about overhead and the financial structure really echoes, I think, some of our own findings and what we've heard. And I think also the point about INGOs needing to have a policy, acknowledging that they have policies in place related to financial structure, and that sometimes those policies can be compound the onerous nature or the lack of full cost recovery that is imposed also by a donor. So you're talking about kind of two layers of failing to really kind of fully assess and ensure financing of the full costs related to programming, which can really create a too high of a barrier for a lot of local institutions to overcome. So that really resonates. And I think, just things that are echoing the decentralization of policymaking within INGOs, decision-making. And I really am interested in this decolonization policy, like how the Canadian government, for example, signs with 2 primes. I think that's a really, really great model to look at. Thanks.
So I can just say, looking at this, Lizzie, I'm seeing a lot about policies, and then I'm also thinking back to the Menti word cloud where it was talking about slow and all of these different things. I think the idea of a policy is really practical and great. And then I'm thinking back to conversations that I have with a lot of our members where it's saying, well, does anyone have a policy to share? How, creating the policy is saying you need a policy is easy to say, but crafting it and writing it and putting it into place is a challenge. And so I hope that that might have come up in your conversations. And I'll also put in a little plug for a survey that we're running right now, which is the ERA, the Equitable, Resilient, the Accountable Index, where we're actually asking both INGOs and NGOs, where are you in this phase? To get a picture of, are you starting to put policies in place? Are you thinking about what the policy might look like? That's going to help us think about what support we can provide you in your next journey. So I just put a little plug in there.
And Kim, how can folks get access to that?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Christine. I'll drop the link here in the chat. We're looking for one survey per organization, so just an organizational survey. It should take about 20 minutes for you to fill out. It closes on Monday. I'm looking, Patricia, your camera is on. I see you. I know you filled it out, so thank you. So hopefully it wasn't too hard for you to fill out and it was useful.
So listen, Patricia has just added into the chat. I wonder if your group discussed spreading institutional leadership globally, not all based in an HQ model. And that seems like a great segue to move to the people and culture slides.
Yeah, so there's a lot here.
And we got a lot. We have 2 slides worth, and we got a lot here. So Eddie, did you want to react to the people and culture slides?
All right, is okay. Just checking. Yeah, so this is one where I remember the webinar we did earlier in the year, which was, debunking the myths around the capacity of local organizations. And what I've been hearing in the interviews I've been doing with senior leaders of national NGOs in the different countries we've been talking to is when it comes to the capacity, there are a couple of things to think about, which are actually highlighted here, that the hiring of staff sometimes is not just the decision of the local national organization, that they are finding that international NGOs or donors actually sometimes are dictating who to hire and how to hire, or they want to be on interview panels. So their autonomy. So when we talk in our theory of change that this is a strategic lever for exercising autonomy, this is an example of where national NGOs or local actors' autonomy is hindered. You can't even choose your own staff. The money or the source of the money or those who are dictating the agenda follow the pipeline of how the money is used and who is going to use that money. So the human resource element is quite critical. Then when it came to also capacity, in terms of skill, they were saying the challenge is not that we don't have capacity. The challenge is because of the plethora of donors with different reporting requirements and doing approaches and frameworks. It therefore means maybe one program officer who has maybe 4 or 5 different projects that are of different funders has to be multi-skilled beyond what would be ordinarily just normal capacity. So they have to know this funder and that funder and that funder and that funder. So it's almost like every funder is asking for bespoke capacity and expertise from one particular person. So I just would like to maybe comment on just those 2 aspects for now.
Yeah, and I think that resonates a lot with what we've been hearing and seeing, and even coming out of USAID to an extent on local capacity strengthening. Whether all of this gets realized in a way that truly centers local organizations remains to be seen, but the new local capacity strengthening policy does talk about how you can't just build capacity of local organizations to become USAID primes. It needs to be, the priorities need to be selected, identified by local organizations, and they need to be funded accordingly to build those kind of back office functions that other organizations that are maybe more well-resourced have been able to do. But it's really about giving them the autonomy and the power to kind of set their own course in that regard.
Yep, I think that's a great idea. And I'm looking at the compensation piece. I know that we have a working group that's grappling with fair and equitable compensation right now. It is not an easy topic to manage in the least. I want to make sure we get to both the last 2 different buckets, funding and finance. I'm seeing here, how do we adapt NICRAs? How are we looking at contextualizing and adapting policies and regulations? The local office chapters, as opposed to this idea of kind of local offices or affiliate models, I think is something that is going to keep coming up. So I asked the group here, reactions, thoughts to some of the ideas that you see here on the page.
Well, one thing that I'll note is just we do have this standalone grouping of funding and finance, but we've seen funding and finance issues and recommendations show up in all of the other groups.
Yes.
And I think that really brings to the fore how important, how the funding is structured, how it flows, what the financial systems look like. At the end of the day, I don't want to think that it's all about money, money, money. But we do know what fuels the ability to actually deliver on the mission. And so, so many of these issues that we're seeing and the recommendations that we're seeing cut across the 4 areas.
Yeah. I think that's right. And I see here on the second page about trust. And I'm assuming when we move down in a second to risk and compliance, we're going to see trust come in here as well. We talked a little bit in our little staff breakout group around language barriers and what the role of language is, both in understanding the regulations and the compliance rules, but also in getting the funding and being able to submit proposals and be able to receive the funding. Cynthia, last word on funding.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, this just really echoes everything that we've heard and learned through, from our clients, from our members, from the course of the year-long discussion that we've been fostering here in this space. I mean, the lack of the understanding of policies and practices, making them be more user-friendly, less kind of high-tech technical language that creates false barriers, the language barrier in terms of English, the trust-based nature of it, really instilling more trust and honoring the reality of the data, which shows that if you implement programs with local actors at the lead and in the design and all other phases of programming, it's going to be more sustainable and equitable. So, really kind of revisiting the way we look at trust and the way we look at risk compliance and how we allocate the funding.
Yeah. And then the final group around risk and compliance, I'm seeing things, again, I don't think any of this is going to be new to us. The rules and regs, particularly around USAID, but not just USAID, can be cumbersome. Barriers to entry are high for a variety of different reasons. And so how are we looking at harmonization? How are we looking at coordination? And then again, at the very bottom, language barriers need to be bridged. So I'll ask anyone from the group any last thoughts on what you're seeing here. But I think we're seeing common themes no matter which group that we're seeing.
Yeah, I'm really interested in this one point about NGOs actually refusing funds from donors where risk and compliance is too heavy. And I think that really speaks to, why at Humentum in particular, we kind of address 3 different key legs of the stool, the funders, the NGOs, and the NGOs, because yes, funders play a huge role in kind of setting these compliance measures, but I think a lot of times we forget that NGOs do have a lot of power to kind of push back on that and, decide when and if they should be taking, funding that has such onerous risk and compliance requirements.
Yeah.
And Jenna, building on that, I think we need to shout out, though, that national NGOs and NGOs that don't have the same track record with funders, maybe haven't been engaged with global agency funders in the same, length of experience, depth of experience. That is the hand that feeds them, so to speak. Exactly. That is where their funding comes from. And so any of us that's been in the position of being dependent on someone or something or funding and wanting to speak back to them and say, we can't take this, or this is too onerous, you really have a struggle. You really think twice or multiple times about, can I afford to say this? And so I think one of the things that we are hoping to do with the work that Humentum is doing, and we are encouraging anybody who is in a position to do this, is to both amplify those voices, elevate those voices. We should be repeating the messages, but the messages should really be those that are coming from the organizations that are having the issues about being able to accept these compliance requirements and the burden of accepting that funding. And that, we should be pushing that agenda across the board.
And then just one last thought I'll take from Patricia, who put here in the chat. Well, and what about accountability? So, for all of the pledges, for all of the individual, changes that we're recommending here and that many organizations are beginning to talk about and take to heart, How do we hold ourselves accountable? In that three-legged stool Jenna mentioned between funders, INGOs, and NGOs, if there's power imbalances, are there also accountability imbalances? And how do we make sure that we have those discussions and bring those to the fore? But Christine, I will hand it over to you to close.
Thank you. Thanks. So I wanted to ask Annie to step in here and just give us her takeaway thoughts from this. She has been an incredibly important supporter and of this work and has been working on a lot of work that's very complementary. And so we'd love to have your voice be the voice that we take away with us from all of these discussions. And then we'll just do a quick wrap up. Kim will give us a couple of logistics reminders and we'll get on our way. So Annie, over to you.
Thank you, Christine, and thank you, everybody. It's been really mind-blowing being part of this both hands-on workshopping ideation session, but also sharing out of insights, very deep insights that we got throughout the year from the locally led development webinar series. The takeaway from what I've been hearing is that there is an appetite for change. We know what the problem is. We can all collectively coalesce around the analysis of what needs to be done. So that's a good thing. That's a very, very positive thing. So it means, just as we've done at Humentum, to move from talking about it, we need to have more people take practical action about the change, right? So it depends on your organization, where you are positioned. And in African culture, we talk about an elephant. So this is like an elephant. I'm sorry if it will sound gross, but if you want to eat an elephant, you can't just eat it whole, right? So it's an African proverb, but what it literally means is it's a big change. And each of us are strategically positioned to tackle the change quite practically from our vantage point from this moment going forward. So that's the second thing. We are clear on the problem. We are clear on what needs to be done across the three actors: national NGOs, INGOs, and funders, right? So what's then the practical action that you can actually take? At Humentum, we are very clear about the 4 levers of change, and that we are engaging INGOs, we are engaging national NGOs, we are engaging donors around these 4 levers of change and convening as well. So what can you do, right? And we are looking to partner, to collaborate, to support, to enable those who want to take that move from just talking to practical action. The last thing I want to talk about is this is about power. And as we know, power in every situation, whichever type of power you think, what's visible, invisible, or is agenda setting, which is hidden power, no one is going to hand it to us. It means we have to go into that space where we are challenging, where we are questioning, where we are doing things practically and modeling to say, you know, you say this isn't going to work, but here we've done something with this national NGO, with this INGO, with this funder, and it's worked. We can take it to scale. So at the heart of what we are trying to change is power, and we need to be able to push back as well. So that's what I wanted to leave us with.
Thank you, Annie. And your words remind me of another proverb, which is, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And I think that that's what we're really trying to build here at Humentum, is working with all of you to build something together and to make that change happen together. And we know that we have to go far. There's a distance to go. So on that note, Kim, any reminders for us before we say goodbye?
Yes, there are. So if I'm listening to these last words, I'm thinking to myself, okay, what do I do now? What do I do? I'm energized. There's a few different things. First of all, we will be sending out the recording and all of the materials that we've co-created together, as well as some other additional resources in a follow-up email in the next few days. What you can do now, make sure you're reading the report summary and sharing this with your colleagues, using it as a way to have the discussion. I mentioned that the ERA index is closing next Monday. We're looking for one response per organization, and that's going to both give you internally an idea of where you are on this journey, but it's also going to allow us to see the big picture so that we can help to make some of the connections between the points we made today and what the sector is doing right now. If you are a Humentum member who is on an executive team, we're living in the DC area and you can get here, we want to see you in person. It's our first in-person event in over 3 years in Washington, DC. And you can learn more about the Executive Summit coming up. And then we just continue the conversations. These are all of the different webinars and roundtables that we are going to be having for the next few weeks and months. We're just going to keep continuing the conversation. This particular series will take a little bit of a break. We'll come back in 2023, but there are so many ways to keep talking and sharing resources, ideas. We want to be thinking about these big ideas, but we also want to be giving you and empowering you ideas about what you can do as both an individual and an organizational to be pushing forward on these change. We can't eat the whole elephant, but we can take small pieces of it. So that is my big takeaway. So thank you all. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and we'll see you at the next event.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.